Most of the time, things seem to work. Policies are introduced, markets respond, technology connects people, and daily life continues as expected. Until it doesn't. Let's look at a few examples. A central bank raises interest rates to curb inflation, yet housing becomes less affordable. Social media platforms are designed to connect people, but they also amplify division. Governments introduce policies to stabilize the economy, yet markets react in unexpected ways. The intention is clear, the outcome is not. So what's actually going on here? In this episode, we step back and look at how societies actually behave, not as isolated decisions, but as interactions that shape outcomes over time. Because once you see that, these patterns stop feeling random. If decisions don't determine outcomes, what does? What you're seeing is not a series of isolated situations. When interest rates affect housing, when technology reshapes social behavior, and when disruptions spread across global systems, these are not random events, and they are not simply the result of one decision or one policy. They are the result of systems reacting to each other. In earlier modules, we looked at different parts of that system, how perception shapes behavior, how power structures influence decisions, and how economic and monetary forces create constraints. But in reality, these don't operate separately. They interact continuously across the economy, politics, society, and technology, shaping outcomes together. And once that happens, things become harder to predict, because outcomes are no longer determined by intention alone. A decision in one area triggers reactions in others. Those reactions influence behavior, and that behavior feeds back into the system again. What you see is not a direct result of a decision, but the result of interaction. Before we can understand how societies change over time, how stability forms, how pressure builds, and why systems eventually shift, we first need to understand how they actually behave. So, what rules are at work here? The first thing to understand is that nothing operates in isolation. The economy is connected to politics. Politics is connected to society. Technology shapes behavior, and behavior feeds back into institutions. These are not separate domains. They are part of the same system. When interest rates rise, it doesn't just affect inflation. It affects housing, business investment, government budgets, and how people make decisions in their daily lives. When platforms change how information flows, they don't just affect communication. They reshape trust, behavior, and how people relate to each other, which then feeds back into politics and institutions. And when supply chains are disrupted, it doesn't just delay products. It affects prices, availability, and how entire economies function. A change in one part of the system doesn't stay there. It spreads, and as it spreads, it interacts with other parts, creating effects that were never part of the original intention. Everything is connected, but not in a simple way. So what happens when these connected systems start reacting to themselves? Systems don't just interact. They respond to their own behavior. When something changes, people react. That reaction creates new effects, and those effects trigger further responses. The system is constantly adjusting to what it just produced. You can see this in prices. When prices begin to rise, people change their behavior. They may buy sooner or adjust expectations, and that behavior can push prices even higher. What started as a small change begins to amplify. The same pattern appears in financial markets. Rising prices attract more participants, pushing prices higher. But when sentiment shifts, the process reverses, often just as quickly. And in society, when trust declines, behavior changes. Cooperation becomes harder, and that can further weaken trust. The system is feeding back into itself. Some of these feedback loops stabilize the system, others amplify change, and once reinforcing loops take hold, small shifts can quickly become large movements. So, what happens when these effects no longer stay contained? Once systems are connected and reacting to themselves, cause and effect stop behaving in a straight line. In simple systems, cause and effect are proportional. A small push produces a small result. Complex systems don't work that way. Sometimes large efforts produce very little visible change. Other times, a seemingly minor event triggers a cascade. Pressure builds quietly for a long time, then the system crosses a threshold and shifts rapidly. You've likely seen this before. A policy is introduced and nothing seems to happen. Then later, something small shifts and suddenly everything moves. Or a situation builds slowly for years with little visible effect until change happens quickly. This is not random. It's the result of how systems behave under pressure. Because pressure doesn't always show up immediately. It builds beneath the surface. And once it reaches a certain point, the system no longer adjusts gradually. It shifts. This is why change often feels sudden, even when it has been developing for a long time. So, what happens when outcomes are no longer proportional to their causes? Policies are introduced, actions are taken, but the result you see is not the direct result of any one of them. The outcomes emerge from the interactions themselves. No single actor is fully in control. You can see this in markets, where no one decides the price of a stock or a house. Prices form through the interaction of many participants. The same is true in society, where patterns of trust, behavior, and opinion are not dictated from the top, but arise from many individual actions interacting over time. Governments can influence outcomes. Institutions can guide behavior. But once systems become complex, no one fully controls how they behave, and that changes how we think about control. Because if outcomes emerge from interaction, not design, then even well-intended decisions can lead to results no one expected. So if no one fully controls the system, what actually shapes the outcome? Once you see how these systems behave, how everything is connected, how feedback shapes behavior, how outcomes are not proportional, and how patterns emerge, things start to look different. What felt random begins to make sense. Policies don't always lead to expected outcomes. Markets don't respond predictably. Social behavior doesn't follow intention. Not because something went wrong, but because this is how complex systems behave. So, what happens when systems appear stable on the surface while pressure continues to build beneath? That's where we're going next. Complex Systems is part of TNBC Explainers Module 4, Systems, Complexity, and Decline. This is TNBC Explainers, Understanding How the World Actually Works. Explore the TNBC Explainers course via the YouTube course list, or visit thenextbigcycle.world for the full course overview and background. This is The Next Big Cycle, TNBC Explainers, your guide to understanding the systems shaping the world around you. TNBC Explainers is a growing YouTube course. New concepts are added over time.
Storyblocks Audio.